here to talk about AI and data governance. We are joined by Terry Dorsey. Terry is Senior Data Architect and Evangelist at Denodo. Thanks so much for being here, Terry.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right, so lay the groundwork for me. Why is strong data governance so important to AI initiatives?
Yeah, I think strong data governance initiatives are important across the board, and I think it just exacerbates or makes that necessity, that more of a necessity. Before, I think in the past, there's been this idea of how do we actually get information to individuals and how they can consume. I think that the idea of having something automated doing that provides those similar, even more challenges, right? So if we can't really do it with humans, there's this challenge of doing it with non-humans. And this idea of autonomy and all these other things that are related with that, with those types of endeavors, makes the need for good governance even more and more critical.
All right, so how can organizations ensure that AI models are grounded in accurate, well-governed data? I mean, this seems like the question that every agency is struggling with.
Right. And I think a lot of it goes back to some of the rationale and reasons as to why, organizations have struggled with analytics themselves, right? There's this idea of what is a foundation and how do we actually make things available to people. The AI readiness aspect of it is very similar to the analytics readiness aspect of it. And we've struggled in those areas as well. I think what organizations need to do, in order to get their arms around this idea of AI readiness, is to understand the agile nature of it and the iterative nature of it. Before, with traditional approaches, we've always been able to have an idea of what we were actually going to do. There was total understanding. We create requirements, and we could develop and produce products towards that. But in this age of AI, and if you liken it to this idea that you want to broaden your consumption to people that are further out in your organization, AI being one of them, there's this idea of being able to make information available for innovative concerns or things where you don't actually know what the target answer is. And when you do AI, these types of AI projects and even, traditional through to generative AI, it's kind of like you're in this space of unknown and creativity. Right. And so this ability to be able to iterate and change your idea of what information is becomes very powerful in that space. And a lot of the ways that we've done to approach making information available really doesn't facilitate that. And so in my opinion, this idea of AI readiness is not only to be able to identify information that has to be deployed within your enterprise, but also this idea of doing it in a way where you can iterate and you can explore. In my experience with doing an AI project, that's exactly what happened. You would start with this idea of what information was, how it was prepared, or whether it was ready. And then you would go through your modeling or algorithm or testing, and you would realize that maybe you wanted something else, or maybe you needed something else, or maybe you had to change your direction. And the brittle approaches in the past do not support that. So in my estimation, this idea of AI readiness is being able to basically turn on a dime, to be able to innovate at speed in order to facilitate, keeping these types of projects going in a healthy or natural manner.
It's funny, we often, in the government space, we often talk about legacy systems, right? Legacy systems that have to be updated. It seems like now we're talking about legacy data practices and that these need to be updated. So what governance updates are needed to really support what you're talking about here?
Right. It's twofold. I think that in the data space, this idea of governance around more structured data is probably a little bit more mature. But now when we talk about generative AI, we get into this space of unstructured information, right? And what that actually means and how you can actually make that information available. So it's kind of twofold. When we talk about legacy approaches, I think it goes back to, kind of what I said earlier, that there was always a known path as to what we wanted to do, be it legacy approaches, be it connecting to legacy systems. This whole idea in my mind, I think AI has just brought forth this idea that companies that are trying to leverage newer technology have to rethink not only the infrastructure or the products that they use, but the methodology as to how they do that. I was talking to one customer, and we were talking about what that actually means in order to move out of this analytics space, which was really more focused, right? When you do analytics program, you know who your consumers are. It's typically a focus group of consumers. Now we're talking about not only broadening it out to people further out in the organization, but now to agents that have to be able to do things on a dime. So that just requires a new way of thinking about how you even model or approach deploying data. And the traditional practices just really don't support that. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, no, excellent. That's excellent. Actually, which really leads to my next question, because one thing that we're hearing a lot about now is the importance of a semantic layer. But what the heck is a semantic layer? And why is that so critical for this?
Right. First, and I liken it back to, a lot of these things we hear, we have different either namings or phrases to describe them. And in my estimation, this idea of a semantic layer, and this is so that we don't get it confused with what people do in analytics and visualization platforms, is this idea of packaging our enterprises so that everyone in the enterprise can take advantage of it. Right. And so this goes beyond what people, people often refer to, visualization tools as semantic layers. They're just tools that allow you to name things. A semantic layer is so much broader than that. It's this idea of here's my enterprise, here's how it relates to things in an enterprise. I don't necessarily know who's going to access it, but I have my arms around how I'm going to provide it out based on who that consumer is. And that means the enterprise as a whole. And where we see a lot of thought in organizations and to how they leverage tools is this idea of abstraction of entities in the enterprise, relating them and allowing people to explore over those products that are created, these more generalized products that you could create them. And the mechanism whereby you do that, in my estimation, matters greatly. I mean, I've seen articles in persistent spaces around generalization, as well as articles in, more in virtual spaces such as ours. And this idea of being able to abstract that and decouple it from, our persistence layers makes that even more powerful. And reusable and manageable over the long run. So to kind of wrap it up, a semantic layer is this idea of me giving you an impression or a view or experience of the enterprise through a governed, defined model. Right. So, I have entities, I have things. Everybody understands what a sales order is. Everybody understands what a customer is. We understand how they relate to each other. And now I can broaden my consumption. Go back to that one customer I was talking to. I asked him, that's great in your analytics space. How do you do that? But how do you now broaden it to the rest of the enterprise? How do you give them access to information that's maybe operational versus historical? And how do you do it in a manner such that you can maintain it and make it consistent throughout the enterprise? And that's what semantic layers actually do.
And that was actually going to be my next question. So the idea is that you have a centralized semantic layer, and that's really about improving consistency across analytics, reporting, and AI tools. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Right. And even broader than that, if you think about it, if I were to package up the enterprise and make it simplistic, everyone can participate, whether it's enterprise integration, whether it's analytics, whether it's reporting, whether it's exploration, whether it's AI, whether it's something 5 years from now that we don't know what it is. There's this idea of here's the enterprise. It is stable. It is consistent. All of the security is managed. Have at it. Or, it's described. It's got metadata. Have at it for the purposes of use downstream, and basically anyone can participate.
All right, so what are some best practices for designing and maintaining a semantic layer that scales as an organization grows or as its applications grow?
It's interesting. I was on a customer call actually today, and we were talking about what are, basically those requirements around that. And those requirements, in my estimation, what I see other companies doing, what I adopted, in my previous employment, was this idea of this generalized things or 360-degree views of things. And we see more and more companies moving to that model because of its ability to be supported, maintained, extended, and stable, right? And so there's this idea of decomposing things into data products that are generalized. So we have orders, we have shipments, we have customers, we have financial journals, we have things that people recognize throughout their organizations. We also talk about how they're related to each other. And what this means, this empowers all consumers on the consuming end to do the things that they need to do. If I want to report, I know how to create things together. Because I'm using business representations of things, I know how to apply business logic to them. If I'm AI, if I know how things are related, you can then ask questions and AI can generate some of those responses. If I want to do enterprise integration, I can make those services and use those same objects in integrations that I want to do, be they for data science initiatives or exchanging information with external entities. So there's just this idea of starting with these generalized entities. Some of the challenges that I see customers run into when we don't have that base, that foundation of these generalized entities are the dependency issues, right? So imagine if I have customers or business customers that are creating things and sharing them, and what that means from the dependency space, right? So now if I want to change what I'm doing because you use it, I now have all of these challenges with consistency. With the semantic layer that's centralized, with generalized products in them, I can make what I need for purpose. And I know that it's stable. I know that it's maintained. I know that it's secure. I know that the descriptions and information in that are managed by people who understand how that works. I've decoupled it from my all of my systems, so I don't really have to deal with that complexity. And it just makes everything simpler from a consumption standpoint, from a support, from an enhancement, from a security, from an auditing, from a monitoring, from an ROI calculation, determining which ones are valuable, from just any type of initiative. This idea of the centralized semantic layer based off of this foundation just makes everything so much simpler to manage within your organization and to take advantage of by a myriad of consumers.
So really, it's like the semantic layer, all that stuff that's so complex, it's like that semantic layer is on top of that complexity. And so the users don't have to worry about that complexity because it's being addressed.
That is correct. And if I develop off of that semantic layer, then regardless of what happens in my enterprise, all my initiatives, will work as usual. I don't have to refactor, projects. Everything just works based off of me consuming from that enterprise semantic layer.
Okay, so let's say I'm an agency and I realize, okay, I need to get my act together. We need to really kind of get this AI readiness. We need to get this semantic alignment. What advice do you have for me? What are some best practices that could really kind of help me get started here?
Right. I think that a lot of it starts from, I guess, collaboration and understanding the big picture. Right. As I was talking to one corporation today, the idea is, what kind of alignment do you have as far as how I'm going to handle my intake for projects? Right. And so determining what that intake is, I think, is crucial. So and the scope, so whether it's going to be for analytics, whether it's going to be broader within the organization, how am I going to bring projects in? Because this determines how I can simplify my development within that semantic layer. And if I can do it based off of these foundational entities, based off of that collaboration, I can have very simple patterns within my organization, how that works. So what does that mean? So if I have an initiative that comes in that uses AI, I can determine which products are needed to support that. And then once I start to do that, I can start to build processes around how that happens. So I can kind of start small, but the small has to do with how do I now drive my processes so that I can get all of those gains downstream. Right. And so it would come in. So what products do you need? What generalized products do you need? I can build those products. I can now make them available for that project, but then they become available for myriad of other projects downstream. So that intake, how, making sure that your methodology aligns as to how you're going to create products within that semantic layer. And you can start building on not only the products, but the processes around that. Because in many instances, those processes are iterative as well. So you can actually start with those initiatives and start building those processes and those products and determining how they actually can work within your organizational environment. And the semantic layer actually facilitates that more easily than if I were to focus that on persistence-based or traditional initiatives going forward.
Excellent. So how does Denodo help? How do you guys help organizations kind of get their arms around this?
Right. So more and more, we have, obviously two offerings to us. So there is the platform itself, right? And we are a logical semantic layer that's based on data virtualization, right? And so we provide or enable that ability to create that enterprise semantic layer out the gate, right? So we're a very lightweight installation. So a lot of that iterative work can be done within that abstracted layer that we provide, that semantic layer that we provide. And then your processes and things can be built on top of that. We provide the security, the governance, the auditing, the monitoring, the ability to create not only these generalized products, but to create more specialized products on top of them, and that can be distributed out. So we allow where we empower organizations to run their data product offering or data offering that's fit for purpose of that organization, right? And if you base this off of best practices, then you can find that you can easily adopt that and iterate on that throughout your organization. We heavily support AI initiatives such as text to language, where you can ask questions of your information. And if that's built off that foundation, that's built into the product as well. And so your generative AI initiatives can be jump started through the platform as well. And we also have a reasoning framework we call Deep Query that also allows organizations to jumpstart in those areas as they create more products within that semantic layer. The ability to control how people actually leverage information within the product is there, how it's deployed, the various protocols are deployed. And so that the consumption of information is therefore managed through their platform very elegantly. And based off of best practices, which means that as your organization's data ecosystem and operational systems changed, those can be managed as separately and independently through the organization. And so that is one big aspect of it. We also provide services and almost ideas around best practices and how the product can be positioned and leveraged within your organization as well when we work with our customers.
Okay, great. Well, Terry, thank you so much. Really appreciate your insights here today.
Thank you. It was really, really good to be here. Thank you.